And welcome back to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. So Joseph, let's talk about that. I mean, you've done a lot, right? I mean, you've been interviewed for TV. You gave a TEDx talk. You've written books. You know, how do we take this idea of really working on ourselves, of doing, you know, what the mystics always call the great work, right? The work of alchemy, of transforming our souls, our personalities, our minds. How do we take that and make that into something that becomes not just a practice, but becomes a way in which we can contribute and be supported by it?
Yeah, a beautiful question. And for me, it always comes back to looking to models, right? Finding a reference point of who did it really, really well, and to model them. And so for me, you know, a lot of it comes back to, you know, these great transformational leaders who started movements, because we can learn a lot from them. And what I've done in my work is in studying those great leaders, you know, be it Dr. King, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, all the way down through Jesus, Buddha, Lao Tzu, that there's a model that they all followed, and that there were, you know, a number of things in common at a very, very high level. We see that there are three things that they all had in common. That they took this knowledge of of knowing how people operated, why we do what we do. And whereas marketers in the modern day would often use that knowledge to engineer a transaction, these great leaders use that knowledge to engineer a transformation. You know, they didn't just change people's behavior, they changed their disposition. They changed the way that they saw themselves and how they were connected to the world, which produced a change in behavior, but it created an enduring change, not just a change in the moment. And so this blueprint, you see that all of those great leaders had three things in common. One is that they were inspired by a big idea. And by big idea, I don't mean that flash of insight in the shower that we have. It was a big idea, and that it was bigger than themselves. It was something that transcended them as an individual, transcended any one person at all as an individual. It was something that united people together, despite their differences. It was something that allowed for differences, but still brought people together in unity. And this big idea always is, in one way or another, to varying degrees, an expression of the universal truth that we are all one, that we are connected. And so you see that with what Dr. King did, with what Gandhi did, you know, with what all the great spiritual leaders did. It was the same thing. They were teaching people to reconciliation, to uniting and creating unity. The second thing that they all had was a clear message. You know, often I teach classes in the professional program at the university here, and I'll put up a picture of Dr. King, and I'll ask the students, what is he saying? And they all know, I have a dream. Now, I've yet to meet anyone who knows every single word to that 16-minute and 26-second speech. But they all know the message was that he had a dream, and that dream was that one day, you know, people would live in unity, that they would be judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And we see that same issue, you know, still today. There are so many issues, you know, that are worth talking about saying we all just want to be treated as equal. And then the third thing that each of those movements had, you know, was evangelists, right? An army of advocates for the cause. Dr. King didn't get 300,000 people out on the march in Washington by himself. He had other people making phone calls, knocking doors, you know, handing out flyers. Even down, you know, you see Jesus, right? He called his 12 apostles and others, you know, to spread the word. It was a form of, you know, creating unity and creating leverage. And so we see this model, you know, that each one of us can follow. But for me, it really comes back to this concept of the big idea. If you really look at it through that lens of your big idea, what drives you needs to be something that in one way is an expression of the truth that we're all one. There is no separation between the airy-fairy, woo-woo inner work that we do and the rubber meeting the road on the outside,
right?
Because everything becomes spiritual. And by spiritual, I mean, our essence, the essence of who we are, is one and the same, that we are all connected.
Right.
And any work that we do that helps increase that, I believe, is spiritual. And any work that we do that, draws people further away is the opposite. And so, really, it's that concept that I shared that, impacted me so much was integration, of seeing that they don't have to be separate. And so bridging that gap is just really about the intention we put behind what we do. Are we creating unity, and bringing things to a more full divine expression, or are we pulling apart?
Right. And a big idea doesn't have to be something super complex. It can also be a very simple idea. And I like, one thing that comes to mind for me is Annie Leonard, created this little video online about, how we manufacture and consume stuff, just to kind of educate people about the waste that's inherent in the system, years ago. And it's touched the lives of millions of people, and it's turned into its own movement in a way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I chat with people, and it doesn't matter what we do. The big idea is really more about intention. So, you can see, take a roofer, for example. One roofer could say, I'm doing this because it's a great way to make a lot of money.
Right.
Or another roofer could say, I believe that all people have the right, to shelter and a safe, peaceful, comfortable home that allows them to have a sanctuary. And that's why they do what they do. And that idea can be an expression of this truth that we're all one, that we all deserve,
right.
Kind of basic, rights and liberties and supports to help us in our own spiritual path, whatever that may be. If it's, being a parent or being a crusader of some sort, or just, filling our job. And so it's that lens of saying, of really about to what degree am I serving people, and to what degree am I living in integrity, with high vibration spiritual principles.
Right. And just, focusing on that analogy you had of the roofer, which is a great one, a roofer who is doing it just to make a lot of money is much more likely to cut corners or to not do quite as good a job. Oh, if I miss one spot, they're going to have to call me back in 6 months. Whereas the roofer who takes it as something like, this is a right that people have to have a roof over their head, is going to be more motivated to do the best work that they can do, and is really going to focus on the quality of their work. That they're going to create a roof that they would want their own family to live under. And then they're much more likely to create something that truly lasts, as opposed to the other roofer that's just thinking about the money and how he can make money on it. He's much more likely to skimp and cut corners and do it cheaply, and much less likely for it to be a work of art in a sense. And all of our work is really a work of art when it comes from our heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the curses of our era is this concept of planned obsolescence.
Yes.
You look around
Yes.
at cities and you see buildings that are hundreds of years old and they're still beautiful.
Yes.
And then you don't see a lot of buildings that are 50, 60 years old because they're being torn down and replaced all the time.
Right.
And you totally nailed it. When we put our heart into something, it becomes art. And it becomes an expression.
Right.
And I love Dr. David Hawkins.
Oh,
He
yes.
said one of the surest ways to help your children to become spiritually minded when they grow up is to surround them with aesthetics. He was talking about, art,
Yeah.
culture, opera, theater, etc. Things that are artistic expressions.
Right.
Because those, they vibrate at a high level, they resonate with us, and they really are spiritual undertakings because they're expressive.
Right, absolutely, absolutely, and part of the way we get to know ourselves can be when we express ourselves in some creative way, like when this novel or story, fiction story comes out of us, and we really look at how we describe the characters and what's going on in the story. That can really be something that comes from within us. That can be a great lesson for us about what is going on inside of us. It could be a story, it could be a painting, a drawing, a piece of music. It could be any form of sort of expression.
Mm-hmm. I agree that, adopting that mission of saying my life is about self-expression is probably one of the most powerful ways to be excellent at whatever it is that we do. Because as you said, you'll put your heart into it. You won't cut the corners, and it becomes a learning process. It becomes a meditation when whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's stand-up paddleboarding or a piece of art or writing, we're going to throw our heart into it, and we're going to be so much more aware and in that present moment that we'll be conscious of, oh, here's what's happening, not only just with my hands, but in my feet and in my brain and my heart, and feeling my blood. We'll be so much more present and involved into it. You can't help but make that, the results, a piece of excellence.
Okay. We're going to go to another break. Just very, very quickly before we go. You talked before about sort of spiritual teachers and leaders. Orion, just the show that aired right before ours, said like there is an opening, there is a need for spiritual teachers more than ever before. Do you believe that's true?
I do, and I think the greatest need is really for recognizing that spiritual teachers come in a lot of different forms, and that anything that drives us inward to find our answers there, yours is a spiritual teacher. And I think often, we're looking for teachers to hand us wisdom from the outside in. And that can be helpful. It can be a good framework, but ultimately, what we're looking for is to tune into that inner whisper. So anything that helps us go there, I believe, is a spiritual teacher.
Wonderful, wonderful. Believe it or not, it's time for us to take our last commercial break of the hour. So everybody, please stay tuned. You're listening to The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, and we'll be right back with Joseph Rancic.